Algernon Hunter, Victorian gentleman, is a man with a lifelong interest in the supernatural. And you could say the supernatural has a lifelong interest in him. It certainly has a habit of seeking him out. Algernon is newly married, and he and his wife Louisa couldn't be happier. The bond between husband and wife should be a special thing. But these two know from experience that when the supernatural is involved, the bonds of wedlock can prove problematic. Now, at an innocent gathering, Algernon is about to meet someone who will remind him of that, in the most extraordinary of circumstances, in a tale we shall call Unholy Wedlock.
Mrs. Lucas's drawing room.
There is someone I wish you to meet, but first, I want you to tell me your impression of him.
Oh, and who's that?
You see that man in the corner?
Which, the tall fellow talking to Miss Montgomery?
Sir Henry? Why, good heavens, no. There's nothing of interest about him. He's a dreadful bore, but still, he's one of those persons whom one simply must have at one's parties, but nobody quite remembers why. But never mind about him. I mean the other gentleman, the one with the spectacles.
No, the scholarly-looking chap with the sandy hair.
That's him.
Well, he seems more interested in your paintings than the party. I should say he is someone who is not often in society and is not the least sorry for it.
When I first asked him to come, he declined my invitation. But when I mentioned that you were to be here, he changed his mind upon an instant. He wants very particularly to meet you.
To meet me?
Yes.
Good heavens, did you see how he started at the thunder? The fellow looks positively hunted.
He strikes you that way, does he?
I wonder at his being out in society at all, for he seems to be suffering very badly with his nerves.
It is very odd, for I have known him for some time, and have never known him to suffer from any nervous complaint until quite recently. He's been so keen to meet you, makes me think there's some reason for the sudden change. Come, let me introduce you. Mr. Evans? What are you doing over here all on your own? This is a party, you know.
Oh, forgive me, Mrs. Lucas. I was admiring these very handsome landscapes.
Allow me to introduce you to my nephew, Algernon Hunter.
Oh, I cannot tell you how delighted I am to make your acquaintance, Mr. Hunter. It is really capital. Yes, sir, delighted.
Well, if you'll excuse me, gentlemen, I must circulate.
I heard of you from Edwards. He was a distant cousin of mine, you know.
Really? Well, then I am pleased to know you, sir. Your cousin was very dear to me.
Yes, he was an excellent fellow, though I regret I hadn't seen him for some time before. Odd business, that.
Yes, it was.
Edwards once told me you were a man of sound judgment.
Well, he honored me.
Tell me, as a man of sound judgment, do you believe the case was really supernatural?
Oh, I do. Judging by what my wife and I witnessed in that house, I find no other explanation sufficient to cover the facts.
Just so. Do you also believe that it is possible for the spirits of a dead person to interact with the living, and even to affect them in a material sense?
When you say a material sense?
To touch them, or to move objects about, that sort of thing.
Well, I am no expert, but I think it is possible. I have heard such stories around a fireside of an evening. How much truth there is in any of them is hard to say. May I inquire what makes you ask?
Oh, just idle curiosity. Forgive me, this is not a very cheerful topic for a dinner party.
Oh, I don't know. Many an evening's frivolities have been enhanced by a good ghost story. Not all are as tragic as the case of Edwards. Most phenomena is quite harmless. Some families even become quite fond of their resident ghosts.
But what if...
What if?
Oh, it is nothing. I was just wondering. You say most phenomena are harmless, but have you ever heard of a case where they were not?
Once or twice.
Is it possible, then?
Yes?
Mr. Hunter, is it possible for a man to be Murdered by a ghost.
Well, that is an interesting question. Do you have a particular reason for asking?
We cannot talk now. Mrs. Lucas is coming back.
Here is my card. Feel free to call on me anytime.
Algernon, dear, you see I've rescued your lovely wife from Sir Henry. Now, you must take your turn. Louisa, dear, let me introduce you to Mr. Evans.
I am charmed, Mrs. Hunter.
I am glad to meet you, Mr. Evans.
Come along, Algernon, dear.
Do excuse me, Mr. Evans. I'm afraid duty calls.
Yes.
I hope you will call on us sometime. What you say is very interesting. I would like to talk further.
The Hunter's drawing room, later that night.
So, darling, what did you make of Mr. Evans?
He seems a very pleasant sort of man. A rather nervous type, perhaps.
Oh, indeed. Do you know, he asked me the strangest question.
Oh, what was that?
He asked me straight out whether I thought it was possible for a man to be murdered by a ghost.
Do you think he had some definite reason for asking?
Well, he may have been thinking in more general terms, but I certainly did not get that impression.
No, he rather reminds me of a startled animal somehow, as though he were in constant expectation of an attack.
Hunted, would you say?
Yes.
That was my impression when I first saw him, but from what quarter does he fear attack? That is the question.
Well, it is one only he can answer.
You did not sense anything?
I see what you're getting at, but no, I sensed his agitation, of course, but one does not need to be a sensitive to feel that.
My aunt was telling me that he has recently become engaged to a widow. She doesn't know much about the fiancé, save for the fact that she is not yet 30, and from the few remarks Evans had let fall on the matter, that her history is something of a tragic one. Perhaps his troubles stem from that region.
I dare say we shall hear all about it before long. Oh, how tired I am. I think it is time for bed.
Mrs. Winter's bedroom, the same night.
I finished locking up, ma'am. Will there be anything else?
No, that's all right, Mrs. Hill. That will be all for tonight. You may go to bed.
Good night, ma'am.
Good night. What was that? Is there someone in the room above?
No, ma'am. Leastways, there shouldn't be. It is probably just the storm.
That was not the storm. Someone is up there.
But that's your room. Who would be in there at this hour?
No one here. Wait. What is that on the dressing table?
Why, 'tis a wedding photograph of you and the old master. However did that get in here?
You didn't put it there?
No, ma'am. I haven't seen this since before we left the old house.
Oh, take it away. For heaven's sake, take it away. Burn it if you must, but get it away from me.
Hunter's drawing room, the next afternoon.
Evans, old boy, it is very good of you to call on us. I was so sorry to have cut short our conversation the other night. I found the topic very interesting.
Yes, Algernon told me about your question. I must admit to a certain curiosity.
My wife is as keenly interested in the supernatural as I am. She is, as you may have heard, a sensitive.
Well, a dinner party was perhaps not the best occasion for discussing such matters. I'm afraid you must think me very forward.
Oh, not in the least.
It is a terrible liberty, I know, as we have only just met. But the truth is, I am in need of advice.
Well, a friend of Edward's is a friend of ours. Pray, tell us what is troubling you.
Yes, we shall help in any way we can.
Well then, I'm engaged to be married. Or at least I think I am.
You think you are engaged?
My fiancée has indicated to me that she believes it might be better for us to call off our engagement. but I am starting at the end. Forgive me.
That's all right. Take your time.
My fiancée, Mrs. Winter, Abigail, has been widowed twice. As you know, though she is not yet 30.
I understood from Mrs. Lucas that you were engaged. She said that your fiancée was a widow. I did not realize she was twice so.
Ah, that is the very source of the mischief. Her first marriage was to a man much older than herself. It was fixed up by her people. Anyway, he turned out to be no beauty, and within 2 years he had drunk himself into his grave, leaving his wife as a woman of independent means.
And her second husband?
Yes, that is where the trouble really began. Her second husband died on their wedding night.
How awful.
Yes, they found him hanging from a tree at the bottom of the garden.
Suicide?
It was ruled as such, but my fiancée has never been completely convinced of it.
What does she believe then?
She believes he had been murdered.
By whom?
By the ghost of her first husband. That is why I ask, is it possible for a man to be murdered by a ghost?
You are referring to a conscious and deliberate act.
I am.
As we have reason to know, the division between the living and the dead is not so absolute as is often supposed. I do not see why it should not be possible.
To materially affect the living to such a degree as to be able to commit murder, I think, must take a very strong and forceful energy.
Is this why Mrs. Winter is reconsidering your engagement? She believes you to be in the same danger?
She does. She told me that from the time of her engagement to Winter, she felt the presence of her first husband about her.
What you say interests me, Evans. Has she experienced anything of the sort since you've become engaged?
Yes. She's convinced that he will never allow her to be happy with another man, that he means to possess her, even in death.
Have you experienced anything yourself? Any impression of danger?
In truth, I have been aware of a feeling of nervousness, which is not usual to me. I put this down as natural, however, in light of my forthcoming marriage. Of course, it is also possible that something of Mrs. Winter's apprehension has communicated itself to my own nerves. Yet, there is a feeling, only a feeling, nothing tangible, of something pressing on a point in the back of my mind, trying to make itself known. I do not know how to describe it except to liken it to the feeling of not being able to remember something, and the harder one tries to recall, the further it slips away. I can feel something is wrong, but the more I try to understand what it is, the further I get from understanding. I dare say that sounds nonsensical.
No, not at all. Sometimes our instincts detect things of which our conscious minds have no notion. Have you mentioned anything of these impressions to Mrs. Winter?
No, I did not wish to add to her concern what really amounts to nothing more than a vague uneasiness.
Do you think it would be possible for us to meet Mrs. Winter?
No, nothing could be easier.
Would she be willing to talk to us about the matter? We are, after all, strangers.
I told her of our meeting and about your experiences. She is very keen to meet you.
Excellent. Then it is settled.
Mrs. Winter's drawing room.
Mr. Hunter, Mrs. Hunter, how glad I am that you could come. John tells me that you have experience of the supernatural. I should be very grateful of any advice you can offer me.
Well, I cannot promise that we will be able to help, but perhaps together we can find a way through your difficulty.
We shall be grateful for any help you can give us.
What can you tell us about your first husband, Mrs. Winter?
It was not a love match by any means. My father's business ran into financial difficulties. William Thompson was his chief creditor. He had it in his power to ruin us, but he offered to forgive my father's debt in exchange for my hand in marriage. In fairness to my father, he gave me the choice, but if he had been ruined, my prospects would have been destroyed anyway, and there was my younger sister to consider. So, I consented. It was not a happy marriage for me. He drank to excess and beat me often. I was not a wife to him. I was a possession, bought and paid for. That is why I am sure you will not think me wicked when I say that I am glad when my husband died.
I think that is completely understandable.
My husband had no family, so his money came to me. I have a very comfortable life now, at least. He has given me a better life dead than he ever did alive.
Yet you chose to remarry.
I did. Arthur Winter was a friend of my sister's husband. I met him on a visit to them. He was a very kind man, so gentle and considerate. He was the very opposite of my first husband. He made me feel safe, Mr. Hunter. Perhaps you can hardly understand what it meant to a woman who has lived as I have.
And you believe your second husband was murdered by your first husband?
Yes. Strange things started happening in the run-up to the wedding. Things belonging to my first husband started appearing around the house. Photographs of my fiancé disappeared or were moved. But I had no idea what the end result would be.
Yet you decided to marry again. Were you not afraid?
When my second husband died, I tried to convince myself that it was my imagination, that things that had happened in the house had another explanation. Then I met John. I did not need to marry Mr. Hunter. I could have lived my life alone and been quite happy, I dare say. But I fell in love. Though I am not in the first flush of youth, I am still a young woman, and I did not see why I should be deprived of the chance to share my life with another. Why should a man who made my life miserable while he lived continue to deprive me of love once he was dead?
That's just how I feel.
But you must see, John dear. Now that it has begun again, I cannot deny the truth anymore. How can I justify the risk to you? I would rather have you live as my friend than die as my husband. He will not let me be happy with any other man. My own Asmodeus.
Is this the same house in which your first husband died?
No, I sold that. I did not want to stay there. Too many memories.
So he had no connection to this house?
None. Besides, Arthur died at his own property.
Just so. And the servants, were they with you before?
The housekeeper, Mrs. Hill, is the only one who came with me from the old house.
Was she fond of your husband?
I see what you are thinking, that it may be she who was behind the disturbances in the house. No, she was not attached to him. He was no better a master than as a husband. Besides, she was with me during the latest disturbance. That is when this photograph was left in my bedroom.
That is your first husband with you?
Yes, it was taken on our wedding day.
Someone or something wishes to remind you of your first marriage. Louisa, are you all right, my dear?
The photograph. Please, take it away. Oh, I feel unwell.
Can I get you anything?
No. I will be well presently.
Louisa is sensitive to psychic impressions. What did you feel, darling?
Anger. So much anger and jealousy. I believe Mrs. Winter is right. There is something supernatural at work here.
Mr. Hunter, I feel I should state this so that you are not led away on a false trail. I did not kill my first husband.
Well,
No, do not protest. I beg you. The thought may have not occurred to you yet, but I've read too many stories in which murderous spouses are menaced by avenging spirits to know that it would be, sooner or later.
I appreciate your frankness, madam.
What is to be done then?
To investigate, we must be present in the house when the disturbances occur.
Oh, there is no difficulty there. You are welcome to stay with me for as long as necessary.
Night. Spare bedroom, Mrs. Winter's house.
Well, Mrs. Hunter, our first night in a haunted house, in a manner of speaking.
One haunted by the dead, anyway. Except it isn't really the house that's haunted, is it? I mean, our ghost has no connection to this house, which means it is Mrs. Winter who is haunted, and possibly Mr. Evans.
Yes, that does make things more difficult. Well, let us see what the night brings. Good night, my darling.
Good night, dear. Algie? Algie! Algernon, will you wake up?
What? What is it?
I can smell burning.
So can I. The door isn't hot.
Mrs. Winter!
Mrs. Winter! Mrs. Winter!
The photograph! It's on fire!
Good heavens!
Quick, put it out!
There, it's out now. This is strange.
What is?
It seems to have smoldered rather than been consumed. See, the edges are blackened and burnt, but the rest of the picture is almost untouched.
It is John's picture. He gave it to me as a gift when we were first courting. It was in a frame in the drawing room. I was awoken by the smell of smoke and the feeling of someone watching me. And I found it propped up there on the dressing table as you saw it, smouldering.
You heard no one enter the room?
No, I do not think so. I cannot be sure.
It is late. Let us all try and get some sleep and look at this fresh in the morning.
Morning. Mrs. Winter's dining room.
Do you expect Mr. Evans today?
Yes, I have told him it would be safer for him if he were to stay away for now. But he is determined.
A faint heart never won a fair lady, Mrs. Winter.
I fear his bold heart will put him in danger, Mr. Hunter.
Algernon and I will consult our books today. There may be some precedent there to guide us. Mr. Evans, ma'am.
I'm sorry to barge in so early, but I had to see you. I woke up this morning to find this pinned to my pillow.
What is it?
It is your certificate of marriage to Thompson.
I say pinned, but it was actually stabbed through by this.
That is my husband's knife. My first husband.
Mrs. Hunter, where are these things usually kept?
The certificate is usually kept locked with other papers in the roll-top desk in the study.
And the knife?
I don't know. I haven't seen it for some time. I disposed of most of my husband's possessions when he died. I suppose it could have been overlooked.
Whether it came from this house or not, it was clearly intended as a warning. When I think it might as easily have been me.
Oh, don't!
I'm sorry, Abby. I shouldn't have spoken so.
You did not see or hear anyone enter the room in the night, Mr. Evans?
I saw no one, but I cannot swear I heard no one. I was conscious of having woken suddenly, so I lit the lamp and looked about me. That is when I saw that on the pillow beside me.
Not a very cheery way to start the morning.
Oh, what are we to do?
First, we need to check that the lock on the desk has not been interfered with. We must, you understand, be sure that no one in the house is behind these things. Then we shall turn to our research.
May I help? I need to feel of some use.
Of course.
Let us go now and examine the desk.
Mrs. Winter's study.
The certificate was locked in this drawer.
No sign of tampering, and the drawer is still locked. Does anyone beside yourself have the keys to this desk?
No, I am the only one. I keep them with me at all times.
Well, that does seem to settle it.
Oh, Mr. Hunter, what are we to do? It is all so awful. It is clear to me that as far as my first husband is concerned, I still belong to him, and he will defend his right to his property.
I fear this has been a terrible shock for you, Mrs. Winter. Perhaps you would like to lie down for a while.
Yes, I think I will. I fear I'm getting a headache.
Get some rest, my dear. I feel certain we will find a way through this.
We had better get to work.
Indeed.
Mrs. Winter's bedroom.
No. No! What do you want? Leave me alone! Who's there? No one there. There's no one there. Oh! Am I going mad?
You are mine.
No! No! Please!
Mine!
No!
Mine!
Heaven preserve me!
You belong to me.
No! Never again! You will not...
Mrs. Winter's study. I never realized the supernatural was such a wide topic. How are we ever to find an answer to a problem amongst so much information?
Don't despair yet, Mr. Evans. I believe I might have found something.
What is it?
An account in Gillen's treatise on hauntings. Listen, I was once called upon to deal with an unusual case of haunting in which a husband was troubled by the spirit of his late wife. His wife had been of a jealous temperament in life and had refused to give up her claim upon her husband's affections, even in death. By using a form of a reverse wedding ceremony, along with an object chosen to symbolize their earthly marriage, I was able to finally sever the bond that held them connected.
My word, if that could work for us.
It is worth a try, at any rate.
We must tread carefully. We do not want to antagonize the spirit further.
What the deuce was that?
What is the wrong with her?
Don't you see him?
See who?
Thompson! He's choking her! Do something!
He's gone.
No, he hasn't! He's coming this way! Mr. Evans, watch out!
Oh! Mrs. Winter! Evans, are you all right?
I think so. I believe he intended to frighten me, not to kill me.
I am all right, but what happened?
It was Thompson. He was choking Mrs. Winter, and then he knocked you over. Did you really not see?
I saw a vague shadow over the bed, but nothing definite.
I saw nothing.
I did not see. I only felt.
It was awful. We must stop him. There is no time to lose.
Mrs. Winter, when you are sufficiently recovered, I think we had best begin.
Mrs. Winter's study.
I have the rosemary and sage that you asked for.
Excellent. Place them in the bowl on the table, please. We must burn them to help banish the negative forces. The rosemary will also serve as a symbol of the memories that hold Thompson. Now, we need something that represents your marriage. Mrs. Winter, do you still have your wedding ring from your first marriage?
Yes. Yes, I do. It is in an old jewelry case in my room. I shall fetch it. I shan't be long.
Do you really believe this will work, Mrs. Hunter?
I cannot promise, but I am hopeful. I am determined to try. He must be stopped.
Yes.
You have the book, but do not be afraid to trust in your own instincts. I believe in you, darling.
Thank you, my dear. I only hope we can rid Mrs. Winter and you, Mr. Evans, of this dreadful burden.
Yes.
I have the ring. Here you are.
Then let us begin.
Very well. Mrs. Winter, please stand here beside the desk. When I say now, I want you to drop the ring into the bowl. Algernon, Mr. Evans, sit over there, please. There is nothing for you to do now.
As you wish.
I call upon the spirit of William Thompson, who is bound to this woman. I call upon these persons here present to witness the dissolution of this bond. Abigail Winter, is it your wish that the bond betwixt you and William should be from this day dissolved?
It is.
Do you make this declaration of your own free will?
I do.
The dead and the living may never be as one. It is against nature. Abigail has, of her own free will, rejected this unnatural state. I call upon the spirit of William to do likewise. Return to the realm of spirit, which is now your proper place, and leave this mortal realm.
Something is happening. I can feel it.
Shh, be still.
By death be parted. What was once joined together in life must now be split asunder.
No!
Now,
With this ring, I banish you.
I now pronounce this union ended. Go forth from this place and return to that place appointed for you. Be gone.
Is it over?
I think so. Well done, darling.
Look at the ring.
Good heavens! It is split clean in two.
I think we may take that as a sign that we were successful.
Mrs. Winter's doorstep.
Thank you both again so much. I feel you have given me my life back, my future.
Yes, thank you. I cannot begin to tell you how grateful we both are.
We are glad to have helped. The only thanks we need is to see you married and happy.
Yes, we are delighted to have been any assistance.
You are both too modest. You may be sure that you will receive an invitation to the wedding as soon as the date is set. We would not be getting married at all if it were not for you. The day would hardly seem complete without you there to share it with us.
You may be sure that we shall keep the date free. Goodbye to you both, and good luck to you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, Hunter, Mrs. Hunter. Take care. What a beautiful day it is.
Yes, I think we may look forward to many more beautiful days.